They say that this country is free, and they say that this country is equal, but it is not equal if it's sometimes.
Attitudes towards homosexuals have varied over time, from expecting all men to engage in same-sex relationships, to casual integration, their acceptance, to seeing the practice as a minor sin, repressing it through law enforcement and judicial mechanisms, to prescribing it underneath a penalty of death. The LGBT community has impacted many aspects of society and, in turn, have been impacted greatly in their daily lives. The earliest occurrences of homosexuality were during ancient Greece. It was a time when human sexuality was respected and openly accepted, unlike now where homosexuals are faced with prejudice in many areas of the U.S. It was common for a man to have a male lover as well as a female for procreation. In the ancient world, homosexuality was abundant, but sooner than later, organized religion shattered such ancient traditions and forced the ideal of homosexuality to degenerate over time until it slowly started to reemerge in the 20th century. Sodomy laws in the United States outlawed a variety of sexual behaviors that were thought to be immoral and crimes against nature. These laws targeted homosexuals and were rarely ever enforced against heterosexuals. These crimes were punishable by death. In 2003, the sodomy laws were ruled to be unconstitutional. Homosexuality expanded from the realms of sin and crime to include that of pathology. This historical shift was generally considered progressive because a sick person was less blameful than a sinner or a criminal. Homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but is nothing to be ashamed of. No vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. We consider it to be a variation of the sexual function produced by certain arrest of sexual development. Many highly respectable individuals of ancient and modern times have been homosexuals, several of the greatest men among them, Plato, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, etc. It is a great injustice to persecute homosexuality as a crime, and cruelty too. If your son is unhappy, neurotic, torn by conflicts, inhibited in his social life, analysis may bring him harmony, peace of mind, full efficiency, whether he remains a homosexual or gets changed. Reprinted in Jones, 1957, from the American Journal of Psychiatry. Until 1973, homosexuality was listed as a mental illness in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of American Psychiatric Association. It was originally listed as a sociopathic personality disturbance in the first edition of the DSM in 1953. Homosexuality was upgraded to a mere sexual deviation in 1968 with the release of the second DSM. Treatments for patients who were diagnosed included electric shock aversion therapy, estrogen therapy, religious counseling, electroconclusive therapy, and psychoanalysis.
This involves showing the gay man pictures of nude males and shocking him with a strong electric current.
Patients reported that treatment had negatively affected their sense of identity. Some patients who were guilty of homosexual acts chose treatment over prison. However, many experts soon found that homosexuality did not meet the criteria to be considered a mental illness, so it was declassified as a mental disorder in 1973. As homosexuality began to resurface, disturbances in society also occurred regarding homosexuals. Stonewall riots transformed the gay rights movement from one limited to a small number of activists into a widespread protest for equal rights and acceptance. In the early hours of June 28, 1969, a group of gay customers at a popular gay bar in Greenwich Village called the Stonewall Inn had grown angry at the harassment by the police. They took a stand and a riot broke out that lasted for 3 days. On the first anniversary of the Stonewall riot, the first gay pride parades in the U.S. history took place in Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, and near the Stonewall Inn in New York. The very first public demonstration for LGBT rights actually began in 1964 in front of the Independence Hall in Philadelphia. That July 4th and every July 4th after for the next 5 years, activists gathered protesting and demanding legislation that would organize the rights of homosexuals as a minority group, referencing the Constitution's inalienable right to the pursuit of happiness and the foundational belief that all men are created equal. The activists called for legislative changes that would improve the lives of American homosexuals. On May 18, 2004, Massachusetts became the first state to legalize gay marriage. The court found the prohibition of gay marriage to be unconstitutional because it denied dignity and equality of all individuals. In the next following 6 years, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Iowa, and Washington, D.C. did the same, and now a total of 37 states have legalized same-sex marriage. Same-sex couples wishing to adopt often face uneven legal challenges. While a person's sexual orientation does not change his or her desire to raise a family, laws and policies concerning same-sex couples adopting have yet to be uniformly applied across all states. Out of the 37 states that allow same-sex marriage, 16 of them definitely allow joint gay adoptions. Lawyers and judges in many states often argue that the traditional nuclear family is one that includes a man and a woman, and it is more ideal for the raising of kids. Special rules apply to gay and lesbian adoption, even though for heterosexuals they only have to be financially stable and be able to support the child medically, educationally, and financially. In order for them to be able to support a child financially, that one would have to be able to work and feel comfortable in the working environment. LGBT employees often face unique challenges at their places of work, so the LGBT community has often fought to end employment discrimination. Employment discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender workers is pervasive and harmful. It violates the core American values of fairness and equality by discriminating against qualified individuals based on characteristics unrelated to the job. In 1975, Pennsylvania became the first state to ban sector employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. States later expanded the use of this law, but not as many states passed laws regarding employment discrimination compared to those for marriage. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act would provide basic protections against workplace discrimination based on irrational prejudice, such as firing workers for being gay or transgender. Even though more than 2/3 of voters support a federal law protecting LGBT people from discrimination in the workplace, the bill has yet to be introduced. This reality still remains that it is legal to fire or refuse to hire someone based on his or her sexual orientation in 29 states. Those who are transgender can be fired or denied employment solely based on their gender identity in 33 states. Such numbers demonstrate the need for federal government to expand non-discrimination protections to LGBT workers. However, students in certain states may not have it that easy. School should be a young person's primary center for learning, growing, and building a foundation for success in the world. Growing up and getting through high school can be challenging for any student, but LGBT youth often face additional obstacles of harassment, abuse, and violence. The National School Climate Survey conducted by GLSEN in 2011 showed that 82% of LGBT youth had problems during the previous year with bullying about sexual orientation. 54% felt unsafe at school due to sexual orientation, 44% due to gender identification, and 32% didn't go to school for at least one day because of feeling unsafe. And school isn't the only place that LGBT youth face challenges. Online, LGBT youth are more susceptible to threats, harassment, or bullying. Students who are perceived to be homosexual have it just as hard as LGBT students. LGBT students who feel their school is unsafe get lower grades, have worse attendance records, and are most likely to drop out of school. So they are 2 to 3 more times more likely to commit suicide and 8 times more likely if their parents don't accept them. 40% of the youth on the streets living without a home are LGBT youth and must live on the streets because they were forced out of their homes due to their sexual orientation or gender identification. LGBT individuals experiencing homelessness are often at a higher risk of violence, abuse, and exploitation compared to their heterosexual peers. Transgender people are particularly at physical risk due to lack of acceptance and are often turned away from shelters, and in some cases signs have been posted barring their entrance. It's hard
I just don't want my gender to hurt me anymore, you know. I just want to be happy with who I am.
Imagine a worse and more harmful expression of homophobia in our time than the fact that there are hundreds and thousands of kids who are being rejected by their families and put onto the streets, says Carl Siciliano, executive director of the Ali Forney Center. The Bible condemns and technically says that homosexuality is punishable by death. But it also says that God loves everyone and that everyone is equal. There is a large variation of religion in the world, all of which are very different, and Christianity being the most popular creates another challenge for many people in the LGBT community. Now many churches are accepting, while many other churches aren't as accepting of those in the LGBT community. It depends on how strict they are regarding the religion. As the younger generation begin to take more important roles in society, they have more of a say in what could be considered normal and abnormal. Since young people are more accepting and open to differences, churches may slowly start to become more accepting. Data shows that social media sites can be the best or worst place for someone in the LGBT community. They can share their stories and let out feelings or thoughts they may not be able to share in a public place or in actual society. they could also gather strength and inspiration from internet stars that are LGBT and not feel so alone. The LGBT community have made very strong impacts on American societies and have changed the way many see the world. American societies have also impacted LGBT communities greatly, and in the end, they keep making progress and becoming more important parts of Americans' history. Society as a whole is basically divided in the middle since the topic is so controversial. Either you support the LGBT community or you don't. It's better than 20 years ago, and 20 years from now, it will be better than society is now.
No matter what we look like, where we come from, or who we are all equally entitled to our human rights and dignity.
Because you've adopted as a core motivation the simple fact that this world would be a whole lot better if we just made an effort to be less horrible to one another.